and welcome to today's webinar, Making Citizenship an Organizing Principle of the U.S. Immigration System. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to the moderator of today's event, Donald Kerwin.
Well, thanks you all for joining us to discuss CMS's new report on making citizenship an organizing principle of the U.S. immigration system. We're particularly grateful to have with us today two leaders from U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, Felicia, Escobar, Carrillo, and Kelly Ryan. Before I begin with the formal introductions, let me speak a bit about the report. The report's overarching vision is fairly simple and straightforward. It argues that immigrants are good for the country and that naturalization should be a defining priority and an organizing principle of the U.S. immigration system. By this, we mean that the United States should view new Americans as presumptive citizens, in Susan Martin's words, or intending citizens, in Hiroshi Motomura's phrase. We think that this is consistent with the vision articulated by President Biden in his early executive order, faith in our legal immigration systems and strengthening integration and inclusion efforts for new Americans. And we know that this vision is starkly at odds with the prior administration's approach, which was to block and diminish legal immigration through administrative action. Of course, not everybody will be able to naturalize, and not everybody will want to, but it's clearly in the nation's interest when immigrants obtain permanent residence and citizenship. Immigrants benefit in just about every way that you can measure, in terms of education, work, income, family unity, civic participation, a sense of belonging, and many other integration metrics. Our report finds, for example, that the median household income of the U.S. naturalized population is almost $26,000 higher than the households of eligible to naturalized residents who have been in the U.S. for the same length of time as the naturalized. And all of these benefits to immigrants radiate out to their circles of association, to their families, even to the next generation, and of course to their communities. Our report finds that more than 8 million persons, roughly 1/4 of those who could naturalize, have not yet done so. Many groups have long been advocating for changes to naturalization requirements, whether related to fees or English proficiency or knowledge of history or civics, waivers of different kinds, the treatment of particular populations. We, of course, would endorse many of those proposals, but our report actually focuses on something different, which is expanding pathways to permanent residence and increasing the pool of eligible to naturalized persons. It also argues that the U.S. should be doing everything it can to promote and to facilitate naturalization and to address the factors, particularly education, language proficiency, and income, that influence the willingness and the ability of immigrants to naturalize. The report also provides in very significant detail estimates of the eligible to naturalize by country of origin, U.S. state, metropolitan statistical area, and provides various demographic variables as well. It describes 3 general categories of eligible to naturalized persons that should be prioritized in order to increase both naturalization numbers and rates. The first is national groups and those in particular jurisdictions with low naturalization rates. That's an obvious group. The second category is groups with high naturalization rates, whether by state or metropolitan area or nationality or whatever it might be, but nonetheless, which have large numbers who have not yet naturalized. A place like New York City would be an example of that. And then finally, groups such as Mexicans and Central Americans, whose rates are below the national average, but have increased over the last decade. So there seems to be momentum among these populations to naturalize. Of course, that's a non-exclusive list, but we lifted those 3 kind of general categories up. So let me stop there to run through our agenda and introduce our superb speakers. They will present in total for around 30 minutes, and we hope to devote 15 minutes or so to questions at the end of the presentations. Our first speaker is Charles Wheeler, who directs the training and legal support section for the Catholic Legal Immigration Network. Prior to working for Clinic, Charles directed the National Immigration Law Center in Los Angeles. He's authored 4 books on various aspects of immigration law. I had to laugh when I read his biographical statement, which said that he's a noted expert in family-based immigration, which is really maybe the most striking understatement I've heard in a long time. I mean, Charles does more to support charitable legal immigration programs and to build legal capacity and expertise across the country in all sorts of communities than any person that I know. We thank him for co-authoring the report and participating in this event. Next will be Bob Warren, who's joining us by pre-recorded video. And Bob's telling he left his career as a professional baseball player for the White Sox for the glory and excitement of a position as demographer at the US Census Bureau. He then worked at the Census Bureau and former Immigration and Naturalization Service for 34 years, including as the director of the INS's Statistic Division for a period from 1986 to 1995. In this latter position, during this period, he projected accurate ranges of the number of unauthorized immigrants that would apply in each state to legalize under the Immigration and Reform and Control Act of 1986. And he's been perfecting his estimates ever since. Bob joined CMS as a senior fellow in 2013, and he basically serves as the brains behind our Democratizing Data project. We're also extremely grateful to have Felicia Escobar Carrillo and Kelly Ryan with us today. Felicia was appointed as USCIS's Chief of Staff on January 28, 2021. Prior to joining USCIS, Felicia served as the Director of Immigration at the Beacon Fund, and previously she was a consultant for the California Community Foundation, helping to implement the Los Angeles Justice Fund. From 2010 to 2017, Felicia served in several positions in the White House Domestic Policy Council, including as Special Assistant to the President for Immigration Policy, Senior Policy Director, and Senior Policy Advisor. She also served as Senior Legislative Assistant to U.S. Senator Ken Salazar from 2004 to 2007. Kelly Ryan is the chair of the Interagency Working Group on the Promotion of Naturalization and a senior advisor at USCIS. Like Felicia, Kelly has had an illustrious career in public service, serving as coordinator of the Intergovernmental Consultations on Migration, Asylum, and Refugees for 6 years, acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Immigration in the DHS Office of Policy, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, and Chief of the Refugee and Asylum Division of the INS. I wanted to thank all of you for being with us today. And without further ado, let me hand it over to Charles Wheeler.
Thanks, Don. And I also want to say thank you for your kind remarks. It's been certainly a privilege working with you for the last quarter century or so. So I repeat, my area of expertise really is family-based immigration. And I wanted to sort of talk, I guess, more as a prologue to the report, which deals, of course, with naturalization. Before you can be eligible to naturalize, you have to be a permanent resident alien. So I really wanted to talk a little bit about how you or how the administration can streamline the process of becoming a permanent resident, how you can break down a lot of barriers that currently exist. Some of those barriers or obstacles were purposefully put in place by the Trump administration in some sort of effort to crash the system. Others, though, obviously spring from COVID in the last year or so, but I think a number of them also have existed for decades, really. 2/3 of the permanent residents in a given year, at least in a good year, about 1 million people become permanent residents. 2/3 of those are based on family relationships, or about 700,000 people. So that's why it's significant that we start with this process. And I wanted to begin talking about the grounds of admissibility, and really on sort of a happy note, and really my hat's off to the Biden administration for rolling back the Trump public charge rule that they pushed through in 2019. The Biden administration dismissed the lawsuits that were pending, basically restoring the old law that pre-existed prior to Trump's efforts. They've erased it from the Code of Federal Regulations, and they brought back the 1999 guidance that the Clinton administration actually put in place. What needs to happen next, though, is some sort of formal rulemaking to really update that 1999 guidance, clarify really where the 5 statutory factors that look at the intending immigrant and how that plays into the affidavit of support. Because both are supposed to be working together, but it's unclear really what emphasis one should have over the other. And I think publicizing and getting notice and comment on a proposed rule and then finally finalizing it really makes it less vulnerable to the next administration who wants to start messing around in this area. Another ground of inadmissibility, and this is certainly not nearly as significant as public charge, but it deals with the issue of false claims of citizenship. You have a lot of kids who enter the United States illegally, make false claims, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old. Do they really have the legal mental capacity to be making these false claims? There is no waiver, so it's basically a permanent bar. In addition to that, you've got an annoying Board of Immigration Appeals decision that recently held that there is no intent requirement, sort of like strict liability. I heard of a case, in fact, just a few days ago, where a permanent resident alien filed for a passport, thinking that he, in fact, was a U.S. citizen. He got his permanent residency before he turned 18, was living here with a U.S. citizen parent. But unfortunately, the law had not protected him at that time, so he really wasn't eligible. But nevertheless, by filing for a U.S. passport, he made a false claim of citizenship. So he technically could be deported and removed from the U.S. So there's certain things the administration could do to clarify this area, bring back exceptions for those who are legally and mentally incapable of making these or who unintentionally made them. As far as waivers for grounds of inadmissibility, Don and I worked together back during the Obama administration to help and urge the administration to issue what's called provisional waivers for unlawful presence, which is a fairly significant ground of inadmissibility for people, particularly those who enter illegally. They can't get their green card if they leave the United States to consular process unless they spend 10 years outside the US. And so the provisional waiver is a great remedy that allows them to file for that waiver here in the US and get that approved before they leave, to take away a lot of the risk and fear. But there's ways that that could be expanded. It could cover other grounds of inadmissibility, such as for fraud or criminal grounds or smuggling. And in addition to that, those people who are currently in immigration proceedings can't get this access to this because they can't get their case administratively closed. And why is that? That's because the Trump administration, through the Attorney General, issued an opinion in a case called Castro-Tum, saying that immigration judges actually don't have the ability, except in limited cases, to administratively close cases. So we need to overturn that. The Fourth Circuit, the Sixth Circuit just recently found those legal logic specious and overturned it. So it really wouldn't take a whole lot to get the Attorney General, this Attorney General, to issue a clarifying and reversing that decision. I think one of the most important things the administration can do is clear up the backlog. I mean, I can't overstate how many cases really are pending with years to go before they are adjudicated. Just for example, with consular processing, you have 500,000 people who have already been declared documentally qualified. In other words, they've already waited their time. The visa is current, available. They've already submitted everything, and they're just simply waiting for a visa to be interviewed, to be scheduled at the consulates. The normal processing, this would take about 3 years. And then, of course, you have another 3-year backlog for everybody who's filed in the meantime. So something has to be done to increase staffing at consulates. Obviously, the COVID-19 has generated all sorts of problems, but these problems existed before that. Ciudad Juarez had over a year backlog even before the pandemic happened. So staff up, prioritize adjudications, The same kind of issue deals with those who are filing to get their green card here in the US with adjustment of status. It's now an average of about 2 years before you can be interviewed for that application, which is really unfortunate. And I think a lot of it deals with this issue of extreme vetting, which is a term that Trump introduced, which put all sorts of resources and staffing and whole offices looking at poring over prior applications to see if there are any irregularities. A lot of that is unnecessary. So prioritize the adjudication of current pending applications. Also end in-person interviews, which takes a lot of staffing and time and resources. This was, again, another Trump administration move, but there are a lot of petitions and applications that can be adjudicated without that. Speed up processing. I noticed that today the USCIS issued a decision saying that they were going to extend work authorization for adjustment applicants from 1 year to 2 years, which is great relief, but it doesn't deal with the 7 to 9 month delay that currently exists for people filing for work authorization, which is really unreasonable, in my opinion. It used to be a 90-day processing. If you didn't get it within 3 months, you could actually go to your local INS, USCIS office and get work authorization. So the system used to work. It's not like we're trying to create something new. There's obviously something that's broken, so see if you can't fix it. With that, there's something called InfoPass appointments that people used to be able to make appointments, get in, clear up issues with a local USCIS. We need to restore that so that people can streamline the process and get problems resolved locally. And then I noticed also that one of my suggestions, which was to bring back the request for evidence policy memo. The USCIS just issued a decision today saying exactly that they were going to make sure that adjudications sent notices to applicants and petitioners saying that they needed more information before they denied an application. Don, how am I doing time-wise? Do I have a few more minutes?
Not really, just maybe.
The only other thing I really want to talk about was the Sanchez decision, the Supreme Court decision, which was unfortunate, but that takes away the ability of people here with temporary protected status to consider themselves inspected and admitted for adjustment purposes. So things that they can do before that 30-day mandate passes, they can adjudicate those applications that are pending in the 9th, 8th, and 6th Circuit. And do a couple other things that I mentioned in my report dealing with people who would leave on advanced parole and come back in. All right, I'm going to stop there and leave it to people to read more in the report on further details.
Thanks, Charles. And I'm sure we'll get to some of this in questions and answers too. So let's turn to Bob Warren now. And we're actually going to, as I said, show a video, and he will speak on the methodology for our estimates of the US eligible or the US or the naturalized, eligible to naturalize. He's going to talk too about determinants of naturalization, and he's going to talk about some findings from the report. So let's go to that video now.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm glad to be with you. I'm going to tell you how we made these estimates of naturalization rates, and then I'll go over some of the results. All of our estimates are derived from data collected in the American Community Survey conducted each year by the Census Bureau. The ACS is a huge survey. It includes about 3 million households, so we can make estimates for areas as small as 100,000 total population. 3 questions on the survey are particularly important for what we do: country of birth, citizenship, and year of immigration. Before we can estimate naturalization rates, or the eligible to naturalize population, we had to remove undocumented residents from the non-citizen population. Otherwise, the percent that naturalized would be underestimated by quite a bit for some countries, such as Mexico, that have large undocumented populations. We estimated undocumented residents, starting with ACS data for all non-citizens that arrived after the IRCA legalization program. Then we removed all of those that we determined were legal residents, such as people on Medicare, government workers, and former military. And after that, we used a procedure that we developed a few years ago to derive detailed estimates of the undocumented population. Now, at this point, we're able to take all of the undocumented residents out of the database. That left us with a legal population, legal non-citizens. And from there, it was fairly easy to compute the population eligible to naturalize. When I say population eligible to naturalize, what I really mean is they're almost all LPRs or green card holders. So at this point, we have a legal immigrant population, and we're able to compute rates of naturalization, and we're able to compute the number that are eligible to naturalize in every state, every city, and for every country of the world. Before I continue, I would like to point out that as far as I know, we're the only group that's able to compile this data in this level of detail, because we're able to take out undocumented residents. In the paper, we show quite a few statistics for the naturalized and the eligible to naturalize population. Excuse me. And we focus on language skills, education, and income. Almost half of the immigrants that are fluent in English are naturalized, but only 11% of those who speak little or no English. The same is true for education. Half of those that have attended college are naturalized, but only 11% of those without a high school education are naturalized. As we've shown in other papers, there is what we call a wage premium for naturalizing. For immigrants that have lived here for 23 years on average, the same length of residence, those naturalized had household incomes that were 26,000 higher than those who had not naturalized. To summarize that section, we found that English skills and higher levels of education played a very important role in determining who would naturalize. But income also played a very important role, especially for those with lower median household incomes. We show estimates of naturalized, eligible to naturalize, and percent naturalized for a lot of cities and states, and you can find those numbers in the paper. Nationwide, about 3/4 of legal immigrants had naturalized. There are a lot of cities and states that have low naturalization rates, and they have a lot of immigrants eligible to naturalize. What we point out in the paper is that there are also a lot of cities and states that have fairly high naturalization rates, but there are a lot of people in those areas that are also eligible to naturalize. For example, the New York metro area has a high naturalization rate, about 77%, but yet there are still 1 million people in the New York metro area that are eligible to naturalize. The final point I want to make is that we show some preliminary findings that indicate that naturalization rates have dropped for India and China, traditionally high naturalization areas, and they've increased quite a lot for immigrants from Mexico and Central America. These findings are fairly recent, and they're for the last 10 or 15 years. But if these findings hold up, this will be big news, because traditionally immigrants from Mexico and Central America have had low naturalization rates. As they naturalize, obviously they'll become voters, and that could be very significant for the future. So those are still preliminary results, so stay tuned. At this point, I will turn it back.
So thanks to Bob for that presentation. And Felicia, we'd like to turn to you now, and wanted to thank you, first of all, for joining us. We know that you're terrifically busy these days, and so we really appreciate your being with us. And wondering if you would speak to the administration's immigration priorities, some of its key efforts and actions to date, and especially those that relate to the report in terms of removing barriers, permanent residence and naturalization, and outreach to immigrant communities as well.
Thanks, Don, so much. And really thank you to the entire team at the Center for Migration Studies of New York for inviting us to join you here today and participate in the webinar. As a part of this new administration's goals, where USCIS is really recommitting itself to a robust public engagement model that welcomes input and feedback from all stakeholders, including folks like you all that do a really important research and help us analyze and assess what is working, what's not working with our current system, and what we might do to improve it. I would say this is especially true when it comes to considering innovative ways to promote citizenship and welcome new Americans to our country. We are aware that many national community-based organizations have been working tirelessly to support lawful permanent residents to be able to apply for citizenship. I know this from my work in philanthropy, but also my previous stints in the federal government, and also my work at the local level. And we are really looking to engage with those networks as well as academics and practitioners to improve our policies and address obstacles. USCIS greatly appreciates your hard work in publishing last week's report, Making Citizenship an Organizing Principle of the U.S. Immigration System. As we heard just now, the report includes a number of recommendations around how to expand access and remove barriers to naturalization. And we are looking forward to reviewing the findings and recommendations more closely. I would say we're also pleased that some of the things we're already doing were noted and mentioned as ideas in the report. So it's good to know that we are that some of the ideas we've already come up with internally within government are also something that you all have prioritized. We're going to be hearing from Kelly Ryan, one of our great colleagues at USCIS, someone I've worked with over the years, and has great experience both domestically but also internationally on issues around our immigration issues. And she's doing great work as a part of the interagency working group on naturalization. So I'm looking forward to you all hearing from her directly. As your report notes, immigration is a priority for the Biden-Harris administration. We've taken several steps to make the United States a more inclusive and welcoming place, as expressed through immigration and on other broader executive orders and proclamations that have been put out and that impact all of the executive branch. Some recent steps that I would point out for you more broadly, there was a request for public input in the Federal Register that the request was a 30-day request for public input on barriers to USCIS benefits and services, and it just actually closed a couple weeks ago, that comment period, and we received over 7,500 responses, and we're very busy looking over all of those ideas. Some of them offer some of the comments offered up new ideas, some of them validated things that we've been thinking about as well, and so looking forward to seeing what comes from that process. As was mentioned, we've also worked to return back to the 1999 policy guidance related to public charge. There's a bunch we're doing with our interagency partners to communicate that message out to the public, because we know that there was a lot of concern and fear out there with the previous administration's public charge guidance. We are also thinking through how to make our policy guidance durable beyond this administration, and updating it to the times that we're in now. We've also worked to eliminate travel bans that were impacting Muslim majority and African countries, and also have been working towards, in consultation with our interagency partners, evaluating and considering new temporary protected status designations or renewals or redesignations. And most recently, in the case of Haiti, we're making plans to redesignate Haiti, and something that is a priority to the Secretary. And stay tuned for the Federal Register notice on that. We're restoring the Central American Minors Program program, the CAM program, that was starting to have impact at the end of the Obama administration, but has been really on hold for the last several years. And we're looking forward to relaunching that program in a more robust way, and to take the lessons learned from the previous round of implementation. And then I would say that, related to the executive order 14012, the restoring faith in our legal immigration systems and strengthening integration and inclusion efforts for new Americans, that EO actually has two very clear directives around naturalization. One is to develop a plan around reducing barriers to naturalization and improving the naturalization process. And the second is the Interagency Naturalization Working Group that we are chairing for DHS, and working across the federal government to really develop a whole of government strategy, national strategy around promoting naturalization. So just to kind of name a few of the things that we've done already, to re-highlight them before I turn it over to Kelly. There are, as folks know, COVID-19 has presented all kinds of challenges for our country, including the work that USCIS does to process immigration benefits. So we're working hard to address those challenges. We've worked to meet the requirements around physical distancing. USCIS has deployed creative solutions using technology. So in particular, we've been using video interviews for naturalization applicants, where an applicant comes into a facility and is in one site, and their interviewing officer is in another location within the facility to help process the application process. I actually saw this in Los Angeles, in our Los Angeles field office at work. And so that's something that we're doing. And really, despite the closures related to COVID and the continuing restrictions, this video interview process has allowed us to, at this point, reach near pre-pandemic levels of naturalization. So we're processing. So we're happy and pleased about that. We're also piloting a program that conducts interviews at overseas DoD locations for military applicants who are seeking to naturalize. And we recently also added a remote naturalization ceremonies process for military candidates and their family members. In terms of other policies, one of the first things we did in the administration was we reverted back to the 2008 civics test, after determining that the 2020 civics test that folks have to take when they naturalize had really created barriers to the process. And then last month, we issued a number of different clarifications to our policy manual that impact and implicate naturalization. So clarification around continuous residence for certain religious workers who travel outside the US for their work, so that they can maintain their continuous residence when they apply for naturalization. We also clarified issues related to applicants who unknowingly or unwillfully register to vote, perhaps when they are applying for a driver's license and there's some kind of motor voter process that, without their knowledge ends up signing them up to register to vote. And then there's also some policies related to veterans in the armed forces and who are honorably discharged but live outside the U.S., making sure that it's clear that they're eligible to naturalize, and that we're working with CBP and others to implement that policy, because we know it can be complicated for some candidates who have honorably served our country but are facing barriers to the naturalization process. So this is just a little bit of what we've done. There are other policies that we're putting out that have implications for all of our benefits that were mentioned earlier today. We look forward to continuing to look at the naturalization process from a holistic approach, and figuring out what else we need to break down barriers for folks who are interested in naturalizing. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kelly, who will talk about the Interagency Naturalization Working Group. She's been hard at work coming up with creative ideas for how we can really deploy all of the federal executive branch's resources to educate people about naturalization and hopefully encourage them to take that step. So Kelly, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Felicia, and thanks to Don and to the entire team at Center for Migration Studies. It's great to be here today to talk to you about these important topics. As Felicia mentioned, I have the honor to chair the Interagency Naturalization Working Group. And so I want to focus today on discussing some of the work that we're already doing to promote naturalization, both in USCIS and as part of the working group. So this executive order 14012 clearly envisions a whole of government approach, and we believe that we're going to be able to use some of our interagency partners to reach potential applicants that we haven't been able to reach or haven't effectively reached in the past. We're going to use data and engage our colleagues to really think about how to reach the number that we're using is the Office of Statistics in USCIS, the 9.2 million lawful permanent residents who've not yet applied for naturalization. We're seeking to contact the whole group through outreach, and then we're also going to focus on underserved communities as well as targeting groups that have not yet come forward. And some of those groups are identified in the CMS report. I'd like to express my appreciation to Charlie and to Bob and to Don for identifying and using those three factors that likely affect naturalization and the methodology in that layered approach: the financial resources, the English proficiency, and the level of education. I think these are very valuable factors that you've identified, and it will help us as we identify ways to move forward. Within USCIS, our Office of Citizenship is working to promote adult citizenship education and address two educational barriers to naturalization that you listed: the English proficiency and the level of education. We think that having that data is useful in targeting outreach, and we're going to host teacher trainings and build capacity for potential groups around the country to help support the educational needs of our targeted populations. We also believe there are many persons who may be unaware of how to apply or have not adequately prepared for the test, or they may think the test and process is too expensive, both the actual cost of the test or to hire or to take a class. So we're addressing these obstacles in partnership with the Naturalization Working Group, but also at the local and community level with our community organization partners. We're going to build and have been building on the existing work achieved by USCIS Office of Citizenship and Field Operations Directorate colleagues. And we're expanding carefully our outreach and also the opportunities, but doing that carefully given the COVID dimension. In terms of outreach, we're exploring ways to reach all the potential applicants through traditional and social media, through email, text, and advertising. We're reviewing our materials on the Citizenship Resource Center to see if we can add a variety of study aids and resources to assist people in their journey towards naturalization. We already provide a lot of the materials such as practice tests, pocket guides, civics flashcards. We have the civics test online, and we also have CD audio files. We have all of these materials online, but we're also working with various organizations who've asked for it to share hard copies of the materials with them. So it is, I think these are very valuable tools for our CBOs and for applicants themselves to try to get access to and use. We also have information that's generally available, but we'll look to see if more needs to be done, such as this 10 Steps to Naturalization brochure and Have You Considered Citizenship? But we're working with our colleagues in the interagency to expand places where people can get those materials. We've targeted materials to specific groups such as asylees and refugees, and they get access to those, and that helps them think early on in their immigration journey about citizenship. We've also looked at a group that's kind of underserved, which is adult adoptees, people who are adopted as children, but who are now adults. So we've updated our material there as State Department, and that gives valuable information on adult adoptees. We have a team that offers national and regional educational trainings, and those teacher trainings are happening all over the country. We've expanded them and are offering them almost daily now to various groups, and they've been very well attended. And I think we're going to see thousands of people take those trainings and expand the offerings that they have. We've also developed a national adult citizenship curriculum, which is free, and it has lesson plans and tips, and working with our Department of Ed colleagues to share that further to various organizations. I'd like to highlight that we have a $10 million citizenship and immigration grants program. There's a new funding opportunity which launches last month, and it closes on July 16th. So we fund about 80 organizations through that each year. It's a 2-year grant cycle. We're leveraging our partnerships with the working group to ensure that we're looking at including potential organizations who have not done this, who have not been a part of it in the past, but who are serving underserved communities. So this is really, trying to address the obstacles to naturalization. We recognize the need to reinvigorate our public engagement efforts, which we're already undertaking, and we are working with the USCIS Ombudsman's Office and the department and the DHS Department of Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. We're going to have an engagement later this month, and we're also looking to responsibly return to in-person engagements as COVID restrictions ease. For those who are not digitally savvy, it's very important that we continue our in-person engagements. We're looking to partner with our federal agencies and working with the National Park Service, the Institute of Museum and Library Services. We're creating citizenship displays that can help people in their local museums and libraries, because these are trusted places for people to get information. And we think that's a very valuable way to spread the work. But we're also looking at developing some creative and innovative efforts through the working group, and we'll be able to report further to you as we develop those. But I want to say we genuinely welcome your feedback and your inputs. Just like the report itself, it's very valuable to us as we identify ways to promote naturalization and overcome obstacles. So with that in mind, Don, I'm going to turn it back to you now. So thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to Felicia as well for those two very thorough and encouraging and positive reports and all the good work that you're doing. We have lots of questions, and maybe I'll just start with one, and then we'll go into audience questions. And that has to do with the issue of whether fear is preventing people from coming forward to seek, benefits and services for which they're eligible, and accessing them, and how you're thinking about addressing that particular barrier to potentially to naturalization.
Thanks for the question. I mean, I think we're very much committed to addressing the fear and the barriers out there, as expressed in Executive Order 14012. We've certainly had heard that there was fear around the test, the civics test, which is why the 2008, we decided to revert back to the 2008 test. It was a test that had been thoroughly vetted, and feedback was provided by stakeholders in the community and experts in test taking and test development. So that was something that we did. We know there's also concerns for folks who are disabled and maybe need to make sure that they're able to still apply, and there's some waivers around certification. There's a form that you all are probably aware of, the N648, that is currently being revised. It's actually, the comment period is open until for another couple of weeks. We're hoping to get feedback on how to make that form more to make it more streamlined and accessible to the folks that actually need to use it, so that they can move forward in the process. I think Kelly and I have had many conversations about how public charge, even though it's not actually implicated in the naturalization process, has had a general impact on people who are seeking benefits. And there's a lot of confusion. There was a lot of confusion even before the last administration's rulemaking in this issue around when public charge came into play. And so there's certainly more work we can do in demystifying that issue and providing clarity to folks who are applying for naturalization about what actually impacts them and what doesn't. And I think there's, also fear around, what happens if I apply for naturalization and I don't, my application is denied, what happens to me? Can I be, subject to enforcement and removal proceedings? And, our colleagues across the department are working on our enforcement priorities, and we have very clear interim priorities to hopefully allay some of those fears and really make sure we're focused on true law enforcement and public safety and national security threats. But I think it's the kind of thing that we're going to have to keep the drumbeat up throughout our next 4 years and hopefully beyond for another term of this administration, where we're really helping people understand that they can get past some of these barriers, that we are actually trying to be responsive to some of the barriers that people raise by creating new policies and new processes. But I'm not sure, Kelly, if you have other things to add. I know there's lots of things that we're thinking about in terms of trusted partners as well.
I just would add very quickly, Felicia, that we have heard this from a number of organizations and advocates, and I think we're going to have to really address it holistically. And we're talking to our community resource officers about public charge and messaging on that, so that we get a clear message out. But the first step, obviously, was the return to the 1999 guidance, which I think has been very well received. So, but we have to build on that.
Thank you. We have a question on the other agencies that are involved in the interagency process and what their role is and what they're contributing and what you're learning from working with them, Kelly.
Thanks, Don. It is one of the most interesting interagency processes I've ever worked on. So I'll just really quickly rattle off the members. We have DHS, which is the chair, but we also have Education, Health and Human Services, Department of State, Labor, Housing and Urban Development, Defense, DOD, Justice, Veterans Affairs, Agriculture, and the Social Security Administration. So it's an amazingly wide breadth of knowledge of our interagency partners. And I think the most important aspect of it is that many of that is reported to the group is that many of our fellow agencies are very trusted and respected at the community level, and so they can amplify messages on promotion of naturalization. They also have listservs and ways to reach their clients in ways that we might not necessarily have. So we're going to be working very closely with them. I'll give one quick example. We're working with Health and Human Services and the Department of Justice to give trainings on naturalization education and the process. And those have had, we've had interest from, hundreds of the HHS stakeholders who tuned in to learn about the naturalization process. So it's already paying off dividends to the creation of this naturalization working group.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions, and I think I'm going to combine them. One is on the barrier of lack of legal representation to people being able to obtain naturalization. And the question is, how can access to legal assistance be improved? Would it be feasible to create an independent federal office that provides guaranteed legal counsel? I think this is an issue that all of you actually have worked on in some way or another. And then kind of a related question, which is, why do people naturalize anyway? What are the benefits of it? So why don't I put both of those questions out to all three of you?
Well, I mean, I could start. I mean, I would say that expanding access to legal service is something that, again, is, I think, a Biden-Harris administration wide priority. The president has actually issued another executive order related to these issues of access to legal services. It's definitely something that's near and dear to my heart. I think that our current Citizenship and Integration Grants Program obviously does provide some support to people who are offering assistance to individuals who are seeking to naturalize, but we know that there's a lot more need than we're able to cover with our resources. So that's really where I think we need to be thinking about how we might be able to increase support for that program. Congress has in the last couple of years actually provided appropriations for this for that program, and perhaps it's something that they could consider and contemplate providing additional support to. And I know people are thinking about that all the time, trying to make sure that we educate Congress about these needs. And there's legislative ideas out there related to this. I think we can also leverage our partnerships with state and local governments who have provided, pretty significant resources on the legal services side, whether it's for naturalization or for deportation defense or other things. And then obviously working with our partners in philanthropy who have funded some really important efforts related to legal services for naturalization, through the New Americans campaign and other efforts. I think we're hoping to engage with philanthropy, engage more with state and local governments. We're feeling like we want to kind of finalize some of our thoughts so that we can come and talk about some concrete ideas with them. So those are some thoughts on my end. I don't know, Kelly, if you want to add other things. I'm sure you have other ideas as well.
I just would add one quick short addendum, which is that we've been working with DOJ because as the questioner is pointing out, we have a lot of people who are supporting applicants in the naturalization journey, and they're eager to become accredited representatives. So we are working very closely with DOJ to get information to people right now that could expand the qualified list of accredited representatives. So it's important DOJ, EOIR work with us that we're going to expand. But clearly that's in addition to hopefully some supports from Congress on money and support to an expanded.
Charles, do you want to talk about legal capacity, expansion of legal capacity and clinics work?
Sure. Well, as Kelly and Felicia has indicated, there is a whole program administered by the Department of Justice that does authorize and accredit not only recognized agencies, but also staff, both at the level of seeking representation in naturalization, but also in immigration proceedings. And I think the question really went to expanding government funding. Although you're allowed an attorney not funded by the government at your hearing, there's nothing that prevents the government from funding that. So we'd love to see expansions. Court order has already been declared for those who are mentally incompetent, need to have that representation. We'd love to see an expansion for unaccompanied minors, for example, in immigration proceedings, and then perhaps even to asylum applicants. So, but again, that does depend upon some funding being there for that purpose. But a lot of progress being made for those who are unaccompanied minors and pilot projects on that front.
Maybe the benefits of citizenship too. I think those are quite clear. I mean, in terms of voting, full participation in the nation's life, economic benefits, et cetera, et cetera. I just encourage you to read the report on that, because that's really what the report is about. A question: to what extent do varying origin country policies explain why many immigrants who are eligible to naturalize choose not to? And in parentheses is expatriation and land ownership policies, and maybe confusion over dual citizenship too, perhaps. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I have heard anecdotally that this sometimes the dual citizenship thing issue ends up being a barrier for certain populations. So I think there's room for additional education in that space. Kelly, I'm not sure if you have other thoughts on those questions.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we thought that perhaps it would not be so strategic to target for promoting naturalization in countries where you lose your citizenship, because that would be, a decision people have to make. But for dual nationalities, what we want to do is work with our consulates where dual nationality is permitted, and have them reinforce the message too, that it's not, a betrayal or a turning away from your country of origin, but rather dual nationalities is entirely appropriate, and that you can, have allegiance to the United States and still be proud to be, a Mexican or Salvadoran or a Frenchman. So this is something we've been thinking about trying to do in concert with our consulates and embassy partners.
I should say that one of the things that Bob looked at, of course, when he was looking at these three variables, was certain nationals from certain countries had the same level of English proficiency and the same level of education, but very different levels of income. And that seemed to really, the point was that you need to have all of those things working together in combination. And that perhaps some of the variances that we think are related to country may be related to lower income of nationals from those countries. I'm just, speculating their hypothesis, but thought I'd raise that. We have maybe time for two two more questions, and one of them comes from my board chair, so I'm absolutely going to have to raise that, or I'm going to catch hell if I don't. And the question is it possible to get a list either nationally or locally comparable to the EOIR pro bono list that could flag possible representation agencies for practice before USCIS? This would go beyond the list of accredited representatives.
I can field that one. Yes, in fact, I just learned about such a list from I give credit to the Stanford Immigration Policy Lab. They put together this list and it's called Ask Bertha, and it has the EOIR accredited reps, but it also has a broader group. So that would be a resource for people.
Okay, why don't we go, any final statements, because you promised to stay with us for an hour and we're fast approaching an hour and we don't want to impose on your generosity with your time. So Felicia or Kelly or Charles?
No, I mean, I would just say that, we look forward to engaging with you all throughout the entire Biden and Harris administration. We know that you all, you do a lot of really important research and really kind of look under the hood of a lot of policies and programs and the practices on the ground that we need to be thinking about as we're implementing new policies. So appreciate the opportunity to start the engagement.
I just wanted to say that I read in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago, a 46-page draft report that the administration is floating around on efforts to change the Trump administration policies and streamline the process. So I'm just grateful for that effort, and I hope that we can continue this sort of dialogue and information sharing as we move forward.
I'd just like to offer my thanks to you all. I mean, the report is so timely in terms of the work we're doing with the executive order. It really is valuable to have your ideas. We don't believe we know everything at all. We really learn from your thoughts, and it is enormously valuable. And we are going to continue, hopefully, to work with you as we try to carry out all of the executive orders that we're obliged to do. So thank you very much.
Thank you to all of you for participating. We really greatly appreciate all you're doing and for being with us today. And thanks to all the participants and listeners. And if you have questions, of course, you can send them to us. We weren't able to get to them all. So thank you, and that'll bring the meeting to an end.